500 guinea.
They talk, also they not be 300.
We talk 300 now, 500 now they carry now.
You thief.
You don't know how much before now.
Oga, na 300.
I say now 500.
Oga, give me my
Don't
change.
change.
Inflation. Just a word. But like yeast, it makes everything rise. Rise so high, even our savings can't fight. From food, to transportation, to clothing, to even rent. The reason basic income barely feels like it came. Our hard-earned money failing to dance to the rhythm of inflation. We barely get through today, only to worry about tomorrow. Yet, tomorrow carries so much hope on its shoulders. Hope amidst the fear of how it will turn out. But despite the gloom, there is good news. We found the best way to save with Jollof Plus. Interest so high, 21% net, even inflation stands no chance. So today, we breathe and choose to secure tomorrow. Today we save to beat inflation tomorrow with Jollof Plus. Download the Jollof Plus app on the Google Play Store or Apple Store and earn up to 21% net on your savings.
Hello and welcome to the Techpoint Africa podcast. My name is Chimgozirim and I will be your host for the day. So today it's been a very slow news week and we are just taking a look at some of the stories that have come across or that we've come across during the week. I guess the first one is Elon Musk meeting with the South African president. So if you've been keeping up with Starlink's woes in Africa or Starlink's expansion drive in Africa, you're probably aware that they've faced significant challenges in expanding into South Africa. So right now, Starlink isn't licensed to operate in South Africa. South Africans can still use Starlink, but the company isn't licensed to operate in the country. And over, I think last week or during the week, Elon Musk met with the South African president. We don't know if there was anything serious. Both parties say the meeting was positive. Whatever positive means, we would find out. But I guess the question that a lot of South Africans have now is, would we finally see Starlink come to South Africa
officially?
Yeah, officially. So that's one question. It's not yet clear if that's going to happen. South Africa has specific requirements that has sort of limited Starlink's ability to expand. Would they give in because of that? The president says the talks were positive. Is it politicians speak or is there something to that? I guess we'll find out in the coming weeks and months. South Africans might have something to cheer for in the next few weeks. But moving on from that, I think the next story we have is a fundraise. So we don't exactly cover fundraisers frequently, but I think this month this is the second fundraise I think that we have covered on the podcast, and covering this for an interesting reason. So the story, Bolu, let's hear what's the story about. Zeno has raised some money. Let's hear about that first.
All right, yes. Like you said, Zeno has raised some money. They actually raised $9.5 million. Zeno is an EV startup that is based in East Africa and mostly in most parts of East Africa, which includes Kenya, Rwanda, Uganda, and Tanzania. So what they basically do is what we've seen with a lot of EV startups in Africa. They kind of launched with plans to introduce swappable batteries. So pretty much coming into EVs from the angle of two-wheelers, three-wheelers, yes, and then making it possible that these vehicles do not really need to spend a lot of time charging, but you can just simply swap out batteries. Right. So what the business model with most EV startups is, you have a subscription, say a monthly subscription. Anytime your battery runs down, you can easily go to they will have different centers across cities, and then you can simply go there, swap out your battery for a fully charged one and use it for as long as each full charge can take you. So that's basically what Zeno is. And it is coming into a market where we've seen a lot of EV startups, including Ampersand, BasiGo. There are a couple of others as well in East Africa. So, yeah, that's Zeno.
All right. So a few interesting things before we get to the really interesting bit is it's founded by a former Tesla employee,
Okay.
which is I think one that's noteworthy. It's basically like what's this former OpenAI CEO Ilya, who went on to start his own startup. I think that's probably one of the fastest companies to get to $1 billion valuation. So yeah, that's one reason why I think this is interesting. The second is not directly tied to it. It's sort of a trend that I have noticed among EVs or EV startups in Africa, and that's basically EV startups and their founders, right? So this, I mean, of course, there isn't like data to back every single thing up.
Okay.
But most EV startups on the continent are founded by Europeans or Americans, basically non-Africans. Most EV startups are founded by non-Africans. And is that a bad thing? Maybe, maybe not. That's basically what we want to look into. So let's see, Bolu, what are your first impressions when you hear that perhaps the most funded EV startups in Africa are founded by someone who is an African? What are your first thoughts? What are your first impressions?
All right, I'll be honest, but I'll also be very diplomatic with my answer so that I will not cause problems. But what comes to my mind when I see all these startups, right, and especially some of the most funded ones, and seeing that they are not Africans, seeing that the founders are not Africans, what comes to mind is basically what will come to mind with any other startup. If you look at other startups that have non-Africans on the team, you would agree that raising funds, they tend to raise funds more easily. Actually, there are a couple of examples we can look at. Again, no sufficient data to back this, but I mean, we have the likes of Carry First, we have the likes of Pula, we even have Andela, right? That comes to mind. But then when you go a step further and then you niche it down to EV startups, right? Aside from the fact that the most funded ones are non-Africans, a lot of the founders are actually non-Africans, right? And then mostly in East Africa. I've noticed that the ones in other parts of Africa, such as like West Africa, for example, to me, basically 100% of them are African founders, right? And then you also notice that maybe we are just we are skewing it a bit, because if you look at the Kenya startup space, generally we've seen, or even East Africa, we've seen a lot of startups that have non-Africans on the founding team. You agree, right? So maybe it's not just an EV thing. Maybe it is now more of an East African thing.
Okay, so let's see. A few things to note is, one, most of the EV activities are taking place in East Africa.
Yeah.
Government regulations are playing a key role in doing all of in that. So, to your thoughts on, like, because it's the region that we typically have a lot of foreign founders or non-African founders, it kind of makes sense. Well, maybe it does. But on the other hand, why are we not seeing why are we not seeing East Africans, like Kenyans, Ugandans, and all of that? Why don't we have them in that space?
So there's a fundamental problem when it comes to Africa and startups that typically do hardware, right? This problem, to me, and from some of the hardware startup founders I've spoken to, a couple of them, there's a problem when it comes to STEM education, right, in Africa, which is a key component of building such startups, such companies, right? If our STEM education is not good, what will happen is the interest in those kind of startups will reduce, right? So take, for example, if For example, I went to school and um, growing up, I typically have access to a lot of computers. I had access to motherboards, different things. All these things are building blocks for building interest in those spaces, right? That's one. A lot of our founders probably do not have that interest in building those things. Even if they do not have sufficient background to build those things. You also notice that some of the West African, some of the founders that we have that are in such spaces, what I also noticed is a lot of them schooled abroad. Most of their education was not really in Nigeria. Take, for example, the founder of Ubenwa. I think that's an AI startup, right? We call AI startup, right? Is not even in the country, for one. There's also the startup by the hardware startup that builds a lot of these drones and UAV. What's his name again? Can't remember his name now. But he's currently also not in the country. Well, in his own case, he didn't really get a lot of his education outside Africa. But the point is that fundamental problem it plays a very important role in interest. Another thing is we do not, because of this STEM issue, because of this fundamental problem, which is the STEM issue, we also do not have a lot of talent, right, when it comes to building those things. So it now makes sense that it's people that have had enough experiences, right, who have economies where they've built a lot of similar startups, have enough experiences, have enough talent. It makes sense that they are the ones that will come in to build these kind of startups, EV startups, right? Things like that. So I think that is probably why we are seeing a lot of foreigners in these spaces.
Okay. So nothing to be particularly worried about. Is that
So
what
I
you're
also
saying?
have a theory.
Okay. What's
So
the
and
theory?
this might be worrisome, right? And the theory is that if you look at the people that are investing in a lot of these startups, right, a lot of them are the investors. I mean, normally a lot of our investors in Nigeria, I say in Nigeria, in Africa, are foreign investors. Right, that's one. But the interesting thing about investors in EV startups is it's not that they are just foreign investors; they are actually corporate VCs, right? These are investment companies that are built out of a particular company, right? So, for example, I think Toyota has one, right, and they've been doing a lot of investment in Africa, right? My theory is that Africa is, when it comes to the resources needed for EVs, the major resources, which is the battery, right? There's a lot of lithium deposited in Africa, right? And so far, mining these deposits have not exactly been very easy for a lot of these foreign companies, right? So it's a theory. It's a theory before I get prosecuted. So my thought is, what if a lot of these companies are being built by their people in Africa, right? Get your guy to come here, build a company, right? He builds the company, you invest in the company, and then somehow it's just basically you want to get something from a company, right? You can easily get a mole into that company, get him employed, get him hired. He's your guy, right? It's easier for you to infiltrate that company through that person. So I'm thinking that could be a theory, that could be a way they're trying to, get into Africa and make whatever extractions they want to do easier.
Okay. One conspiracy theory down. I don't know if I subscribe to the theory that they are maybe sending people to because I mean it's a roundabout way of doing all of that, but I think it's still, yes, we have a healthy number of non-Africans building startups in the East African region. That's clear. But I think what this should, and this is a thought I had earlier in the week, for some core sectors, like really core technological sectors, we might find that, or we might find that a few years from now, we are in like we are seriously lagging behind. I guess AI is one.
Yeah.
EVs are one, or is the other. And the reason for this is we lack the skill, either because we haven't trained for it in our universities, our tertiary institutions.
Yeah.
We lack the skill, and the other would be we lack the necessary investments to back all of this up. So for EVs, obviously it requires a lot of investments. We've talked about how while they might be more efficient for a user, they are still more expensive to acquire, and that initial cost will represent a major stumbling block
But I
for
think
anyone who wants to acquire
for
them.
that, actually, I think we are finding a way around it, especially here in Africa.
We are not really finding a way around it.
The way
What
around
we are
is
doing-
just two-wheelers
That's
and
not the way
three-wheelers.
around it.
Okay.
What we are doing is basically playing at the bottom of the pyramid. Yes, you're using an EV, but your EV is what? A two-wheeler.
It's Okada.
How exactly do you really want? And okay, we are seeing governments, at least in Nigeria, push back on the use of two-wheelers in certain areas of the cities. Do you? And now that's where you're playing. So what would probably happen is that you would have EVs, but those EVs would be used for what? Maybe delivery bikes, right? Not for personal consumption. And I don't know how many delivery bikes we could possibly have compared to probably personal vehicles. The gap, like it's you're missing out on a whole lot. So the person who can provide, I think we've said this on the podcast before, that anyone who can figure out how to provide EVs significantly cheaper would cash out big in Africa. That's probably going to take a long time. But again, we might find ourselves losing out on the major value that can be gained from these industries because we are not investing in these startups. So for Zeno, when I was looking through the list of investors, most of the investors, I think 4DX is probably the only one that is it's not even African, if I remember correctly.
We are just used to them.
Yeah. So we don't have a local VC investing in EVs, and they probably have very good reasons for that. But again, without rambling, I think we are going to miss out on the major value creation that can come from that industry if we continue on this trajectory. The other is like a wake-up call for governments. I think our educational curriculum needs to be overhauled. A lot has been said about the need to overhaul our educational curriculum and make sure that it's keeping with the times.
Yeah.
But we are not a lot being done in that line, and we might have to pay the price at some point if we do not take it seriously.
We're already paying the price.
Well, anyway, moving on to the second story and probably the last story for the podcast. It is just gist. It's nothing too deep. Safaricom and two other companies are part of a consortium that wants to help the Ministry of Health in Kenya digitize their health system or healthcare system. Bolu, do you want to tell us what's happening there?
All right. So Kenya wants to create an integrated healthcare information system, basically digitizing their healthcare. And doing this is a couple of investors that will be doing this with $800 million. Some of the investors include Safaricom, Convergence, Apero Limited. That's a firm linked to an Indian businessman. Right. So what this is supposed to do is digitize the healthcare system. And how exactly will this work? So they're basically going to build in a period of, I think,
10 years.
over 10 years. Those investors will cover their money. But what they're actually doing is they want to deliver an health information exchange system, right? Different kinds of health systems that will mean that health information is exchanged easily. There is interoperability between the health information of Kenyans, basically, which will improve healthcare. So some of the problems you see with our healthcare system, I don't know if it's the same outside Africa, but mainly in Africa, some of the major problems is your health information is not interoperable. For example, live in Lagos and your hospital has your information. If you leave Lagos at any point to somewhere else, it's like basically creating another database for your health information in that separate place. So these are some of the things that the digitization of the healthcare system will solve.
Okay. So, I mean, it's just the deal was announced, or the partnership was announced this week, and it's barely, I mean, today is Thursday, it's barely Friday, and we have already seen, or Safaricom has seen some pushback on that. So, apparently, the chair of Safaricom, Adio Kawaja, is linked to one of the companies. So, his law firm has advised convergence in the past, and opposition politicians say that this represents a conflict of interest.
Yeah. And Convergence is one of the companies.
Yeah, Convergence is one of the companies that in the consortium. So yeah, they are saying this guy doesn't deserve to be, or Safaricom doesn't deserve to be a part of this consortium because the chairman of the company is linked. And okay, it's not just because of that. There's also the issues like, is accusations now? Okay, they're also referring to the fact that he has a relationship or a close relationship with the Kenyan president. It's interesting. It's an interesting turn of events.
Does that really
matter?
Yeah.
Well, it does, and it does. So conflict of interest in the sense that okay, this is me playing devil's advocate. They could look at it as did you get this deal through was the process transparent? Was the process fair? Or were you included in this deal because you have a relationship with this person? And then the fact that he even advised, or his law firm advised, a second company. It's a consortium of 3 people. This is a huge deal, $800 million. And then of the 2 companies that are part of it, you're the chair for one, and your law firm advised the other, right? I think they have some leg to stand on, because the question now becomes, okay, yes, Safaricom is contributing about 17% of the 800 million, but Convergence is contributing a significant portion. So between the 2 companies, they are contributing, I think, nearly half, if not, nearly half or more than half actually, of the money that would be invested, which also means they could make a significant amount of money from this deal. So yeah, I think they are well within their rights to question whether the process was fair. I don't know what that means for Safaricom, whether this is just coming how many months after. So the thing is, Safaricom they've been under fire ever since the Kenyan protests. First it was, did you collude with the government to cut off internet connection, and now you're being asked whether your chair is being sort of accused. Your chair is being accused of conflict of interest. So yeah, I don't know. I wonder how that will play out. Would the government have to review the contracts? Because if sufficient pressure is mounted, they might decide to review the contract.
Yeah.
Would they? I don't know. Would they review the contract, or would they just brush it aside? Would the Kenyan people be involved? Because this is the second time in, I think, the last 3 months that Safaricom is in the news.
I don't think the Kenyan people will be involved because it doesn't affect them directly.
It does affect them directly. It's the government. So Safaricom would be working with the government. Convergence would be working with the government. So it affects them. Whether they would be involved and to what extent, I think that's probably what would sway the outcome of this situation. Whether the government decides, okay, you know what, let's review this thing because people are getting antsy and stuff. But yeah, I think that's it. Earlier I said that this has been a slow news week, and yeah, we've come to the end of the podcast. This is probably the shortest podcast you're going to be listening to from us in a very long while. But yeah, it's been great catching you up on a few of the stories from across Africa. I mean, just 3 of them, but yeah, a few of the stories. Before we leave, just take a minute to send your reactions to the podcast. If you enjoyed listening to the podcast, you can send us a mail at podcast@techpoint.africa. We would read your email and we respond. Just be very nice and gentle when you're sending them. You can also take some time to share the podcast with your friends. If you're on the email list, you could forward the email that informs you about it to them, or you could just send them a link from your favorite podcast platform. So yeah, you can find us on Google Podcasts. Oh, okay, Google Podcasts is over. You can find us on Spotify,
YouTube
Apple
Music.
YouTube Music, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Don't also forget to subscribe to our flagship newsletter, Techpoint Digest. And if you're a startup founder or you're interested in building one, Equity Merchants is where you get tips, resources, news on how to navigate the journey. If you're interested in, I guess, the nerdy things around tech, how stuff work, how what's the name?
How cool tech works.
Yeah, if you're interested in the nerdy things about startups, you should check out how cool tech works. And if you want to stay up to date with workplace practices, workplace trends, and anything happening in the workplace, then the Modern Workplace newsletter is your best bet. So with that, we have come to the end of the podcast, and I hope to see you next week. Bye.
Bye-bye.